Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to Respect Her Game. If you're enjoying this show, be sure to check out Nesson's daily sports podcast. Boston has entered the chat. You can listen on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to your podcasts. Hey, I'm Annabelle Hasselbeck here with Kasey Hudson, and this is Respect Her Game. We're so excited because we have a packed show this week for you guys. We got some different news in the WNBA. We'll talk the PWHL, some women's college hoops, and our girls on fire. But the bigger news in Boston, okay, is that the sun is out. It is March. So, Kasey, how are you liking March in Boston?
I almost feel like I'm fully ready for the weather changes up here.
You were like, all right, I've had enough.
Yeah, like I get it now. I get what it's like to feel a warmer day, and then it get cold all of a sudden. It got windy this weekend. I was like, oh no, I started to put my jackets away too soon, and then all of a sudden the sun's back out. But I love it. I'm so glad that it's a warmer day, and I can't believe I am saying that. It's warmer, and I think the high is like 52?
Yeah, no, it's warmer for what we've had, and just to see the sun, I think is a big thing. But this is my one thing that I've learned once I moved to Boston was that you can never put your coat away.
Yeah, I guess that's the warning that like I have avoided heating. But like, okay, the coat closet, I'll keep it normal. I pulled it back out. I threw it in the coat closet. But yeah, today's been so nice. I mean, I'm literally outside with just a jean jacket on, and I'm shocked about it.
Love it. We love the jean jacket days. Well, just talking about the Boston weather, did you do anything fun this weekend?
Fun, psychotic, crazy. This was my first like real hectic weekend in Boston. For starters, as everyone knows, it was my birthday last week.
Yes.
So my mom flew in she landed at 7:30 in the morning, and then from there she's like, oh, let's go grab coffee and tea in Boston. I was like, Mom, we've got like an hour before I got work stuff to do. So we popped around a little bit, and then that just took us into Friday, just exploring Boston. And then Friday was the NHL trade deadline, and that was psychotic because, well, like any trade deadline or free agency by a professional league, they love to have everybody hanging on the edge of their seat. They like to make you feel like you could breathe for a second.
It's entertainment, right? It's entertainment at this point.
All of a sudden, it's like psychotic. So my mom and I thought we had a window to go shopping together. We go shopping, and we're in Abercrombie, and all of a sudden, it's like, alert, look out for these big Bruins trades. And I'm like, Mom, I got to get back to the house. I got to get some things documented. And then that night we had an emergency podcast because as most Bruins, I mean, everybody should know by now, Brad Marchand gets traded to Florida. So that was our Friday night. And then Saturday we were at the Boston Fleet game. But like my mom had the time of her life. So it was a hectic, fun, exciting weekend.
Well, I'm glad your mom had fun. But just the way that you described it, it's kind of like Grey's Anatomy. Like, I got to get to the hospital. Like, I got to get home. Like, obviously very different. Like, two very important careers, just different in their own respects. But just how you describe it, like kind of the life of a reporter is very much so like that.
Oh my gosh. And I almost forgot about it for a minute because while, you know, everyone knows the Lightning has been my focus for years, when I made my first transition up north, moving to New Jersey, my focus was in studio. So I wasn't doing the on the ground stuff as much. And then I get here and I'm helping out, you know, and wearing different hats, which I love. But the reporter hat is just like, you forget how like you don't have a life and you're very much in it. And just like a doctor, you're on call. So whenever news breaks, you're in the midst of it, and you've got to fact check everything because you got to figure out contract totals, and you got to hear if there's any conversations being leaked. So it was just funny, and like I keep apologizing to my mom. I'm like, I'm so sorry, and she's like, I just love watching you do what you do. So it was great because, you know, parents just want their proud moment, and that's exactly what it was. So we were never too far from home, but there was plenty of moments in the past 5 days where it was like, we got to run home. I got to do something for a minute. I got to get this thought translated out to be prepared for a tweet, to be prepared for this. So it was great. It's exciting. It's what we sign up for.
Yeah, and I'm sure your mom absolutely loved that, and just the excitement that she probably got. Oh, yep, Kasey's really going all in Boston here. So that's super exciting, and I loved hearing that.
Yeah, she didn't love me almost running out of the store with my stuff still in my hand because I was in the changing room, and then I'm like, we got to go. Yeah. And she's like, you need to pay for your stuff. Yes. And I was like, you're paying for it. It's my birthday. Yeah. So
that's amazing. Well, I'm glad it was a fun weekend, exciting weekend for you and your mom. And just on the topic of crazy news, there was other headlines that were made in the WNBA. about a potential strike that the players will take amidst CBA talks. And many players have been outspoken about wanting to change the CBA for a long time, and especially, really boiling it down to the revenue shares between the players and the league. But the headlines were really made because of what Angel Reese said and what the players deserve. So here's what Angel Reese said a couple days ago on her Unapologetically Angel podcast with Dejanay Carrington, and here is what she said.
Yeah, the CBA is coming up. I can't wait.
Girl, y'all benefited from everything. Y'all youngins benefited from NIL.
What does that mean? We deserve more.
Of course,
everybody.
I agree.
Everybody.
I agree with that.
But we got to get paid the consequences.
What?
Damn, we got to get it up.
Y'all got to deal
y'all.
with something. Y'all got to do something.
But the women coming in, not this year, but next year. Because the ones coming in this year will still be on the rookie contract again. Mm-hmm. The ones the year after, they going to get more. They probably going to be making more than us.
No, they are.
I'm hurt.
They are. Yeah. I've been in the meetings. They are.
I need to get in the field.
You need to come to the
I
meetings.
got to get in the meetings because I'm hearing they don't give us, if y'all don't give us what we want, we sitting out.
That's a possibility for real.
Yeah.
It was kind of a possibility on the last one, but now I feel like just with the leverage that we have right now, and it's just a time that women's basketball is going crazy. They're really, it's gonna be a time next year.
Ooh,
so
I'm excited.
But we deserve it.
Well, first off, I actually just love getting to hear this perspective from the way that they're talking to each other. You wouldn't know if they're just sitting on the couch together or in a real studio doing a show and doing this podcast just by the casualness and the friendship that you can tell that they're talking about. But real serious things, right? And Angel Reese said, she kind of mentioned we might as well just sit out, right? Yep. And then you look at the headlines and it's WNBA is going to go on strike. And I just thought it was so funny when you actually watch her podcast and you listen and just kind of get the vibe of how they're talking and oh my gosh, you youngins got so much with the NIL, and she's like, no, but we deserve more. And to see the contrast of just the style that they were talking on the podcast to the headlines, and yes, they were threatening to go on strike, right? But I think when you look at how it was really said, the urgency is just probably a little bit different.
Right, absolutely. It's headlines wise, it made it seem like we have something to look out for right now, whereas the conversation aspect, like you pointed out, it almost sounded like they were hanging out on the phone. Look, if this doesn't happen, what are our options here? And she was basically I'm not above sitting out. We have the power to do that now, which they do. Because if they start getting whispers going into Caitlin Clark's ear, who is a key asset to elevating the eyes and the avenues in this game, then they're going to raise conversations and they're going to put the decision makers in a hot seat to make something happen. So I do love the conversational aspect of this, but you make a completely outstanding point to say the headlines are saying one thing. This conversation was kind of alluding to another thing. They were bouncing around their options. She said the meetings have been interesting, basically. So it doesn't tell us that they're genuinely heading in one direction or another. Mm-hmm. It's just saying wow, considering everything, this is a crap position that we're in. So we have more options than we think.
Definitely. And I like that you bring up the meetings and Caitlin Clark potentially getting involved in that. And if she were to, what that would mean, because it's the same for Angel Reese. She's saying, I got to get in on these meetings. Why am I not in these discussions? And I think it's a great point because when you do have so much social power really outside of the league and public power, that does have to have some effect on the league, whether they know it or not. It's definitely subconscious, and it would be the same exact thing with Caitlin Clark, right? And so I think that's why Angel Reese could have a huge effect if she were to get in on those meetings, and it was so casual. You'd be like, wait, you're not in on the meetings?
Yeah, it made me think twice.
Right? But you see, she is a younger player, so it does make sense. But at the same time, her perspective, as valuable as it's going to be, is also not the perspective of every single player in the WNBA, because she's getting different brand deals, different sponsorships. So that's why things like players' unions are so important to have, women who have had all the different experiences in the league and continue to. But no, I thought it was very, I was caught off guard when she said that she wasn't in those meetings.
Yeah, and just touching more on Angel Reese specifically, athletes being on podcasts, athletes having their own podcasts, this is so new. So they have a very powerful weapon that they could wield in favor of making sure their voice is heard, but not just heard, accurately heard. Mm-hmm. Because if a player wanted to shake things up or, threaten a sit out or a strike, a couple years ago, they had to do that by vocalizing it to a reliable media source, hoping that they would translate the message accordingly. There's always a bit of a clickbait piece to it. So the message gets a little misconstrued, as we talked about at the top here, whereas like Angel Reese can sit down in her podcast, send her message out loud, use her audience and her social backing and make waves, which is going to honestly put CBA in other situations not wanting to have that kind of fight. The fight is very different now with social media. And then to touch on the magnitude of this, Angel Reese is a young player, like you mentioned, but she's a young player coming into the WNBA with a social media presence and following, with endorsements that jump on her social media presence, where other players, older players, they don't know what that's like. A lot of these older players don't have those endorsement deals or support, and that's where a chunk, if not majority, of any quality pay comes from the WNBA females. Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese's salaries, most of that is because of the endorsements they were able to come into the WNBA with.
For sure. And just like you said, right, like their social medias can be a tool for like monetary reasons, but also to defend themselves. And I think that's why it's so important, because these women can go to, the clickbait that was said or whatever, someone might falsely report or make an assumption of, and say, hey, actually just go listen to my podcast and you'll hear the real thing. They don't have to worry about like going before the media and having this huge statement. They can do what Angel Reese literally did. And she had this tweet, following the podcast, and people were saying, oh, Angel Reese wants to be paid just as much as NBA players. And like, obviously you all heard that clip. That was not what
she didn't say that.
I don't even think the NBA was even referenced, but this is what she said in her tweet to clear this up. She said, I love how y'all have selective hearing, which I thought was a really funny way, a very passive aggressive but kind way to say that. I'm hearing they don't, give us what we want. We're sitting out. That's the truth. I never said anything about the NBA. We are prepared to stay at the negotiating table for as long as it takes, which the WNBA season starts in May. So this will be coming up soon. She went on to say, here's the link to my podcast so you can hear the conversation too. I will continue to use my voice to speak for what we want and we deserve as a league. Thank you. And so I just love that she was able to point back to her podcast, because as real as those conversations are, they might seem like just two girls talking and like friends, but they are serious, and it is really about what's going on in the news.
Yeah, and that's so important to point out too, because now they have the ability to not be put in a hole or have their back against the wall just for a headline. Like, I love that she, like you said, dropped the podcast link and said, go listen for yourself and make of this what it is. And the information that she has in there for anybody that's kind of sitting on the fence as to what she meant by this, now they can move forward and understand, like, they do deserve to be paid more, especially with the clear growth of the sport over this past season, the direction that it's definitely going to go in. I mean, Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese only sparked other players to be just as good, but more importantly, we talk about it here on Respect Her Game. Look at how women's college basketball is taking off, and the audience they're starting to draw in. Like, you're talking about the future of the WNBA that's only going to get hotter, only going to get
and
brighter.
Stars that are just becoming superstars, right? Like the
Watkins.
College athletes. Yes, college athletes there have been stars in college sports, but now with just the attention, the brand deals, and just the more media that's available, like, you're seeing literal superstars come out of this.
Yeah, and then let's pick apart this other thing that she mentioned that you and I were both shocked about, the NIL. So think about it from a business perspective. You've got this NIL who just blew things up for college athletes, created a pay scale that on some ends are absolutely ridiculous. On other ends, it's sustainable, but you can't imagine a kid coming out of college making six figures through NIL come into a league and barely touch that. I mean, league minimum in WNBA is not six figures. So what you could potentially make in college has to push the price up into what the payment structure is going to be in the WNBA. So that alone has to change everything. Whether the players want to be paid more or not, you're not going to have a college student come out, make more money in college, be in a professional league that they've dreamed about their entire lives and make pennies in correlation to it and only rely on endorsements to make that up. So NIL is going to play a pushing role in all of this, I would think.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I think some of the urgency is coming from. And Angel Reese and Carrington, they talked about it later on in the podcast, just about, hey, the rookies, the 2026 rookies might be making more than us. And I think that is, as much as it might come across as like some animosity, it's just more so like, hey, we are, tenured people in this league. Like, we should not be making less than the rookies do in certain situations if we have the power. I would say this, if we have the power to change the CBA and change how the league is doing that. And so I think that for them was like, man, I don't want this to be the situation more so like if I'm, getting paid less than the rookies coming in who haven't even touched the court yet. So I think urgency wise, like, this has always been a topic of discussion. This has always been something the players have been asking for, is more revenue share, because right now what the facts are is they're only getting 9% of what the league is making. And compared to other pro sports teams, that is like literally nothing.
Literally nothing.
So I think the urgency is really coming from a lot of things, but I think more so because of that rookie knowledge of, oh my gosh, like, we could have people coming in that aren't making anything. And this is also why you see leagues like the Unrivaled League starting, because people like Nafisa Collier and Brianna Stewart want to give the players the ability to have power and autonomy over the blow up of women's basketball.
Yeah, basically to capitalize off of the momentum of it. And you just think about it too with what you just said. Rookies can come in and potentially make more money, but it's the veterans that set the presence. It's also the veterans that are going to help carry teams into playoffs, into, championship opportunities. And then what message are you sending to them? If you don't have a social media presence, if you don't have endorsements chasing you down, you can't be a $1.1 million player like, the young people who were brought into this kind of system. And this past playoffs is a perfect example. I mean, the Connecticut Sun had veterans on their team that made them more relevant. Even though the conversations do exist and kind of set off from Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Another prime example, the Dream. I mean, they kind of had some runs where they were upsetting other teams in the WNBA, but a lot of that was because of the veteran presence. And like now you see what veterans they just brought in during the offseason. So it can't just benefit the rookies and the people who had an opportunity to capitalize off of the social and endorsement momentum. It's got to benefit everybody. The league has to bump it up.
Definitely. And Kelsey Plum actually had a really cool and eye-opening explanation to just how this message has been misconstrued. And she really wanted just to set it straight on the Resident podcast. So here's what she said.
So in 2025, that's our new, opportunity to renegotiate or opt out. So there are definitely future opportunities coming, but I will say that it's one of those things that we are not asking to get paid what the men get paid. We're asking to get paid the same percentage of revenue shared.
Okay.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Got it. So that's a huge misconception.
That's a huge misconception.
Got it. Okay,
sure. Yeah, because every video is like, oh, this person gets paid this person gets paid that, right?
So I want to be really clear about that. Like, I don't think I should get paid the same as LeBron.
Right.
But the percentage of revenue, like, for example, they sell my jersey in Mandalay Bay, I don't get a dime.
You don't get any money from jersey sales?
That's crazy. No way.
So that's why it's like
image and likeness.
Okay,
Exactly.
yeah, okay, that's
so like that's the stuff we're talking about.
Sure,
you know what I'm
okay.
saying? So I think that obviously we're young. We're only like 25 years into the league. The NBA is at 100. So where we're at 25, we're way past where the NBA was.
Right. Got it.
We don't forget that though. We compare it to now to where the NBA is now. Of
course.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is fine. It's an uphill battle, like I said, but I guarantee you, as it continues to progress, I mean, things will change. Hopefully, like, my goal is by the time I leave the league, I would like to see it like a lot better than I found it.
I love how she ended that.
Yeah.
Ended that clip with just, I would love to, by the time that I leave the league, to see it better than I found it and I came in. And I think that was a great way for her just to be like, this is not what, like, this is the misconception. And people think that we're asking to be paid the same as NBA players, but that's not what it is. And you could hear the two other people on the podcast be like, whoa,
Shocked.
no way. Like, shocked. Yeah. It's like, well, no, it's just obvious that wouldn't be the case because it makes no sense. Right. These are smart, intelligent women who, yes, are going to fight for what they deserve and what they know that they can have. Just with the viewership going up, the evaluations going up, they see the hype for their league now, but they're not asking anything crazy.
No, not at all. And the clarification on her end of saying we're not asking to get paid what the men get paid. That's the first thing people try to combat and argue is like, you shouldn't be getting paid that yet anyway, or you shouldn't be getting paid that anyway because viewership and all the things that play into it. But here's the reality. When she says revenue share, and then when she finds out she's not making money off of the jerseys that she's selling, that's crazy. Now, for WNBA players, you're looking at a 9 to 10% revenue from the team that goes into their salary. The salary cap as of 2024 for the WNBA was $1 million, a little north of $1,463,100,000. That's nothing when you think of team pay. But the revenue share, when it comes to NBA players receive 49 to 51% of the league's basketball income. The leap from 9 to 10% to 49 to 51%.
It's wild.
They're not asking for anything crazy, especially if jerseys aren't even a part of their team revenue on the WNBA side. So her clarifying that, I think, is so important because the minute that somebody disagrees with something, I think the conversation gets very muted and like you're not even hearing what she's asking for. She doesn't want to be paid what LeBron gets paid. She doesn't even want the league median for the NBA. She wants the revenue share to come in and make sense.
And the key thing that she said that really like has been backed by people like Dawn Staley was that, hey, when we compare where we are right now as a WNBA to where the NBA players were and what they were getting paid, like we're actually doing better than them in our 20 plus years of being a league. However, we're not comparing ourselves to the NBA years ago and the WNBA. Like we're comparing to right now, 2025. What is the standard? What should we deserve in that situation? And that was something that Dawn Staley had actually touched on. She said, just in this conversation of the high rookie deals and how this would all play out, she said, I think it's par for the course. I think our league is a very young league. The WNBA is very young. And if we're going to be anything like the NBA was, you know, back when they were only 28 years old, it's probably comparable. So at the same time as it was comparable that Dawn Staley was saying, you know, from years ago, Kelsey Plum is saying, you know, we need to do what's going on right now.
And that's such a good point to make as well, because when you mention like we're doing better at that 20-year mark than they were doing, well, from a business standpoint, are we always looking from a bird's eye view? You can start putting the wheels in motion to better invest
That's
into
what the goal
this
is, right? Like the goal is to do better than we were doing years ago.
Right. Like if we have superseded their 20-year mark, what they were doing, the income they were bringing in, I think you can bet safely as a business and investor that like in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to continue on an upward trajectory. The barriers are only going to break down even further. I can't see the regression in this. So I feel like they have some positive conversations coming their way. That's for sure. But I don't think they're going to have to go to strike. So listen to the specific words of Angel Reese and Kelsey Plum and what they're saying and what they're asking for, because it doesn't have to get that dramatic.
And well, regardless, the WNBA season is right now kicking off on May 16th. And so the league is set to just keep the old CBA rules until then, unless new negotiating starts. So we will keep you updated with that. But you can stream the entire Red Sox season with a Nessun 360 annual plan available at all new reduced price of just $20 a month annually. And for a limited time, get four free tickets to Fenway with your purchase. Visit Nessun360.com to sign up today. Well, Kasey, the Boston Fleet just missed a huge potential win. They seem to go into overtime with this Montreal team every single time they play them. They lost an OT 3-2 in Agganis Arena in Massachusetts, which was kind of a bummer, but they'll have the opportunity to get back there at some point. But what did you think about this game?
Oh my gosh. Well, as I mentioned, my chaotic weekend, it did also consist of being at the Boston Fleet game. So Boston versus Montreal. This has kind of been a great matchup throughout the season. So we know PWHL, just 6 teams, but when you can get that consistency seeing a team, it almost gets harder to beat them. Montreal's the number 1 team in the PWHL right now for a number of reasons, but I think Boston be able to push this to overtime, you know, yet again, Boston be able to stay in this fight with a team that's just so dynamic right now. It gives you a lot of hope. They've had a decent climb over their past 5 to 10 games, just kind of showing how well they can get into better positioning for the playoffs that are coming up here shortly. So as for that game more specifically, you saw them make quick adjustments. You saw them be able to kind of keep their head in it, because for the most part, and it's funny because my mom was sitting in the stands by herself. I was running around working a bit. And my mom texts me and she goes, how come every time the Montreal gets on their side of the ice to try to score, there's so many of them and so much opportunity, and then when Boston gets to their side, it's not as many of them? And I'm like, look at how smart she is.
There you go.
So it's they're making adjustments for their coverage. You've got a lot of dynamic offensive players, and then you've got some defensive players that just need a little bit more help or speed on that back end when it comes to backtracking. So Montreal, fastest team out there right now. They've got a lot of offensive weapons. So Boston's staying in it, and they're taking good strides to head towards a postseason. I don't look too deeply into it. Between Montreal and Boston, both goaltenders keep shifting for position 1 and position 2 in the rankings. So there's just this fun go back and forth. Boston's ability to bounce back into games. We talked with Natalie Norrie about it. Like, they are a really good comeback team, and that's kind of that extra gusto that you need if you're going to make a postseason run. So I think Boston's in a good spot. I think it was really disappointing for them to lose in overtime on Saturday, but if you're going to lose to a team, Montreal's the team to lose to.
Definitely. Well, they've been in this overtime position many times. I think 8 out of the 11 times that they've played in Montreal, including the playoffs, which is absolutely crazy. But just like you kind of said, like, they need to find a way at the end to get that win, right? Like, it can't just be, late in the game when they start to get their footing. And that's what Boston head coach Courtney Kessel said. She said another overtime game versus Montreal, which was kind of funny. She's like, oh, another, that was her opening statement. Another overtime game against Montreal. I feel like it's something we like to do. I think our last 40 was much better than our first 20, so we have to find a way to come out and make an impact in the first 20. Is there a player on this Boston Fleet team who you feel like will be able to get the Fleet over the hump of really making that first punch and getting a score on the scoreboard earlier in one of the periods?
Absolutely. And that's actually a great question, because building off of what she said, they've got to find a way to show up in the first 20. And that's kind of been the theme of their entire season. Now, on the front end of the season, they were all very much still trying to find their identity in a number of ways. Every individual player was trying to kind of solidify their role so that they knew what that looked like in order to compete. With that being said, kind of just touching back to the adjustments that I mentioned, they almost wait till that second period to make adjustments, where it's like they need to be more of tone setters in that first period. And I love that you asked about a player, because Hillary Knight, she's the player that can set the tone early in the first period for this Boston Fleet team, and they can build off of her getting things going, setting the tone, pulling momentum in their favor. And you're starting to see that in her play. You're starting to see how the players can rally around her when she has the initial the initial tone setting play. So last week you saw some tremendous things out of Hillary Knight, which nobody should be surprised about. But I think she's the one who can take a lead role in setting the opening tone and having some opening scoring opportunities. They're feeling out their opponent too much in that first 20. They're getting back in the game in the second period, and then there's this toe-to-toe motion all throughout the third period. And that's what I mean by they're a great comeback team. So it's great to see they have that ability, but they've got to come out swinging harder in the first.
It's fear for your opponents when you know they're good in the third period.
Oh, yeah.
But still, the game is really won in all of the entirety of the game. But another bright spot, though, for the Fleet was that they got to play in Agganis Arena, which is a really iconic and fun and exciting place to play. Downtown Boston, it's where BU plays, and just can imagine that there were a lot of, BU hockey fans there, and maybe some younger girls in the Boston area that were able to go. It was a sold-out game. It was the Fleet's, I think, second sold-out game of the season, which was just so absolutely crazy. So could you just speak from being there what that environment was like?
Oh my gosh, it was honestly overwhelming in the best way possible, because you did see a lot of BU jerseys and like them representing former females that have played at such a historic arena, for one, and for two, it was sold out. But just to see so many men and women and so many boys and girls there to support the Fleet team, like, I can even say I didn't expect that, and I hate to say something like that, you know what I mean?
Well, if you've never seen it, then you're not going to expect it.
Exactly.
Right?
So I mentioned that my mom was sitting by herself in the stands. I think she was like section 114, so I ran upstairs to check on her a couple of times. And
hey, you good? Just checking. You having fun?
Like, you situated? Are you sitting around any crazy people? But she wasn't. So even the camaraderie in the stands, I mean, we're not from here. My mom's not from here. And then furthermore, my mom's foreign, she's obsessed with hockey because of me. So she said that she was sitting in the stands, and like everybody was just like so excited to talk about and like inform about the Boston Fleet, about where professional hockey for women has grown, and like see these young girls in the stands wearing these jerseys, just wanting to become these women that are on the ice, and moreover wanting to become the coaches. I mean, my mom was like learning about Seattle Kraken's assistant coach while she's there, you know, at a Boston Fleet game. So just the existence of this conversation being so normal, for one, but for two, the excitement and the hype around it, it was just like, my mom didn't want to leave because I was like, well, it's been a long day, I'm tired, I'm done with work, we can head out now. Yeah. And she's like, no, I have to know what happens. Like, she was bought in from top to bottom with this entire experience. And, you know, while we want to stick to highlighting the Boston Fleet, it was everything about it. I mean, she loved watching all of the players for both the Fleet and Montreal. So I have to say that the atmosphere was amazing. Good. I ran into Natalie. She was running 100 million miles per hour also, but she had a lot of work to do that day, that's for sure.
That's awesome. Well, it is super exciting, and that's where it's continuing to go, right? Like Charlotte North, she's the team leader of this new WLL Boston Guard team for women's lacrosse. That will be the pro team in Boston. She got to drop a puck at one of their recent games and talk to the team beforehand. And so you see like the combination of just the Boston Fleet really embracing themselves as a Boston pro sports team, but then also really welcoming on the new Boston sports teams and even Boston Nation. There was a social media collab on the Boston Fleet Instagram, and it was like a TikTok trend that I hadn't seen, truthfully, but it was like you step on the phone and then you pick it up and it's somebody new, and it went from the Boston Fleet to the WLL with Charlotte North, and then the Boston Nation, some of those players, and that's a team that we'll see eventually. But I do think that playing off the excitement of the arena, I think that's the whole atmosphere that we're really going to get in the city of Boston with pro women's sports.
Well, yeah, because like if you think about it, location sometimes is half the battle and half the draw. You know, like people out of curiosity might just want to be like, okay, let's pop into BU Arena. I've heard so much about it. Then
it's
you get there.
It's a tourist place. It really is. Yeah,
it really, really is. And even again, I didn't even realize the magnitude of it. So I mean, at one point, I'm sure my mom was walking around and she's just like looking at all the trophy cases and all the things and sending me all these questions while I'm at work. And it was just really cool because the experience pulls you in from so many different avenues, but the arena is one that's going to welcome fans in and spark curiosity. And I think that definitely started. I mean, you said it, a sold out crowd. Now knowing consistently that's going to be there, more people are going to be curious, more people are going to come in and take a look, and then you're going to be battling it out for tickets. I mean, potentially, I'm trying to kidnap you to the game at the end of the month.
I know, I got to go. This was a great, like, welcome in. I got to get to one of those games, and even just, like, this show at some point is going to be WLL, Boston Fleet, Boston Nation. It's going to be packed. So I love it, and I'm excited, and what a fun weekend.
Oh, my gosh, absolutely. And then something else to add to the atmosphere and everything is, you know, I think I kind of mentioned it, or if I didn't, I would forgive me, everyone. We're 8 games away from the postseason, and the PWHL has a very unique playoff style, which I had to ask Natalie and get clarification on because I'm like, I think I heard you correctly, but I'm not sure. So there's only 6 teams in the PWHL. The first seed gets to pick from the 3rd or the 4th and choose who they want to compete against. Now, once the season wraps, they've got 24 hours to decide if they're going to go for the 3rd ranked team or the 4th ranked team. And that makes you feel like, don't you have a little bit of an upper hand there, like to be able to choose if you want to go against 3 or 4? But it's also extra important right now, especially for any hockey heads out there, because the Boston Fleet have climbed from the 4th ranking to the 3rd ranking, and they're tied there, but they're looking to make a move to take over 2nd place. And the momentum that they have right now, the way that they have been playing, they're getting very well poised in position to do just that. And the other thing that I've noticed too, which I should have added to the Montreal conversation, because they see their opponents so often, and because they're kind of that comeback team, after playing a couple times, they find a way to beat their opponent. The Minnesota Frost was a pain to the Boston Fleet all season long. They had a small break. Once they got back from that break, then they finally had an opportunity to beat the Frost. And ever since then, their game has just climbed from then on out. So it's exciting because now we're looking to a postseason, and if they hop out of that number 3 spot, then they're going to be in a decision-making seat and hopefully be able to find themselves in a position to compete as a champion.
You want to be in the driver's seat. That is dangerous. And, man, it's kind of like you're looking like, I'm going to take on you.
Yes.
I absolutely love it.
It's so wild. Like, when I first got that, I was like, Natalie, I'm not reading this or digesting it correctly.
It's very unique, but I think that's kind of what adds to when you start a new league and you have something that, the people around you haven't seen. You kind of got to do different things, right? Especially if you only have 6 teams. But that is all exciting. I'm excited to keep up with the PWHL and the Boston Fleet specifically. They're very close to that number 2 seed. I think they're only a point away from Toronto and catching up to them. But if you're enjoying the show, you can catch new episodes of Respect Her Game every Tuesday. You can watch on YouTube and Twitch and listen on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Okay, Kasey, we had I would say, an unexpected championship SEC game, but not surprising, okay? We had Texas, South Carolina, and South Carolina absolutely rolled over Texas. They won 64-49, getting their three-peat for the SEC title, but this was their 9th championship overall. Did you expect such a dominant performance over the number 1 ranked Texas team?
No, I didn't. I underestimated this one, that's for sure. And not to say that we haven't seen South Carolina have, their climb, right? They've been having their moment. But it's more so the fact that Texas just kind of looked like the team to beat, and they didn't present themselves to be that beatable. So I wasn't expecting such a dominant performance. But when you also take a look at, how the season has trended, then I think to myself, South Carolina might be like the most complete team in the mix right now, top to bottom, firing on all cylinders, offense and defense in equal measure. And then I'm like, this makes some sense. Then you hear some comments from the game and post-game pressers, and you're like, my bad for thinking
that
this
they
was
were
a possibility.
Out when they were number 4, number 5, right? Yep. Everybody's like, oh, there goes South Carolina. Maybe not this year, but I think you're dead on. Like, they are peaking at the right time.
Yes.
And they're getting into this championship basketball. They're getting into playoff basketball, Sunday basketball, as Don Staley was saying. And they know the blinders that you have to put on when you get into the conference championships, and now in a couple days here finding out where they'll be in March Madness. And in the first quarter, Texas was in this game. Like, it was very even. Second quarter, South Carolina just blew them out of the water. They could not keep up, and it was really led by South Carolina's defense. And you could tell that was a point of emphasis that they had been talking about. Hey, we got to really lean into our defense. And Madison Booker, Texas's star player, only had 10 points, which is wild when you think about what she's been able to do this season. South Carolina broke their 15-game win streak and forced Texas to make 18 turnovers, and just the supporting players around Booker just could not elevate them and get them, the buckets that they needed.
Yeah, it became an all hands on deck situation, and once you're getting into these tight competitions, depth and extra hands and extra capabilities and skill sets, that's what's going to get you over the finish line. Like, a perfect example is the highlight of what UCLA has been for the past couple of months up until lately, right? And then, is it Lauren Betts, correct? Yeah, so Lauren Betts, what did teams start figuring out? How do we minimize her? Or if she's just putting up points, how do we create, issues? How do we force turnovers? How do we block her shots? So kind of cueing in on having that 1-point production person versus a hands-on deck approach, like, that's what's going to help you move the milestone. And I think that's the recipe that they figured out there, is like, all right, if we're not having everyone put up a certain amount of points, then how do we get the ball? How do we have possession for winning? And creating turnovers is a great way to do that. And they're going to compete with, the theme of what USC is doing so well. USC is so strong defensively, and they have the ability to force the possession back in their favor because of turnovers, because of block shots. So it's going to be interesting to see how this continues to play out.
It is. They've cracked the code, and it seems like South Carolina has now really gotten their footing. They know what's going on. And so here is what head coach Don Staley had to say after their winning.
Young Raven's been here a lot. Breezy's been here a lot. So it's different. And I know there are a lot of South Carolina fans in the building, but it's just different playing on this Sunday. And if you haven't really experienced it, you need to experience it. And I know that come the next few years, Texas is going to be right back here. And they'll be, and I'm not saying that they weren't prepared. It's just, to win a national championship, you got to have been to a Final Four and experienced all the things that come with it. And then if you ever get a chance to go back, you just right some of the ship that needs to be righted. You get overly excited. You get so close to the goal, and then something trips you up. When you've gone through that process, it doesn't trip you up.
Well, South Carolina is not going to get tripped up after this. And if that's your coach leading it, she's like, we're not going to, fall into this trap. We're not going to get over the excited, and we're going to see kind of past that, right? Because this is championship basketball. And I think this is really the key. This is the key. There are other teams who made been to those championship games, once or twice, maybe some off years. And Texas said, this game will haunt us for a while. But I just love how Dawn Staley, mentioned her team's experience, because sometimes you can use that and it can hurt a team because they think, oh, well, we've done it before. We're not going to prepare as much. But this team sees it as we're going to put on the blinders. We know what we need to do. There's a different level of preparation. Yeah. There's a different level of focus. And there's a different really mindset in how you communicate as a team. Do we need to overstress no phones in the locker room? Do we need to overstress you need to get to the training room earlier because we have more media to be at, right? There's all these things that are really fun and exciting that come along with March Madness and SEC championship, weekends and fun things and gift bags and merch, whatever it is. But those can also be distractions.
Yeah, that's actually such a good point, especially between how you just bridged what she said and then adding to that the mindset. And you can underestimate the mindset if you're not an experienced team in this position. And I think one thing that you can always say about Dawn Staley is her composure and how that rolls over into her players and how they can manage these highly stressful situations without getting out of character. She's such a great leader in that aspect. So, a big hats off to the coaching, because you're going to be the one to keep your players' minds in the game, minds around this situation, help them to solidify what that tunnel vision needs to look and feel like in order to be successful. And just kind of building off of that, something else that she mentioned in her press conferences and stuff was they had the most manufactured schedule to get them to this point. They welcome the ups and the downs of the season because they learned how to manage such a time as this. And it's nothing to say against Texas's schedule. She even gives them props and say, we'll see them back here next year in this position because they're going to learn from this. Now they have experience to draw off of and pull into the fight next year. But between the head coach for South Carolina, between their schedule this season, they were poised in position to handle this the way they did.
You're right. She knew it was going to be hard. They knew who they were going to come against, and they made it a difficult schedule for these reasons so that she could put her neck out and say, we need to be the number one seed and all the things. And I think just kind of like what you said, it really relies on the coach's experience as well. As much as it is the players being there, the coach's breadth of knowledge and understanding of have we been here before is able to translate down to her coaches or to her players.
Yeah, because funny enough, what I'd love your perspective on is knowing that you're a good team and knowing the dance that's the rankings, knowing that you're a number one caliber team, but you're not sitting at that number one spot. You come from a championship caliber collegiate program. Would you think that South Carolina, they don't look at the rankings? Even though they're at such a high topic of conversation, would you think that they're just no, we know what we can do. We've done it before. We're just going to focus right here. We'll pay attention to the rankings later.
Well, here's the thing is that the rankings matter, right? They do matter where you get seated. You definitely know it. You definitely see it on you're scrolling on your Instagram. It's going to be blown up. Your algorithm is probably your team. But I think the best thing that the coaches can do is say, hey, I'm going to worry about that. I'm going to put my neck out and say, I'm going to talk to the league, or I'm going to say this publicly, or even in game, I'm going to worry about the refs, so that you as the player say, my coach is fighting for me. My coach is protecting me. I don't have to worry about, will we get the bye? Will we get the, which team do we want to play? Because your coach is doing that for you. And I think just alongside that, that was something that I experienced at Boston College, is my coach would always say in the middle of a game or, heading into the seating, hey, don't worry about that. We'll take care of it with who we, think that the conversation needs to go to, or even in game, hey, we're going to worry about the refs. Right. You guys do the X's and O's. And I think for a player, that was the best thing that you could hear, because you do care and you want to go after it. But when you know that your coach is protecting you, then you're all good. And I would say something with the just like the schedule and getting into championship weekend, our team had been to multiple championships before I got there, and it was my freshman year, and I remember like being so excited. We're going to NCAAs, like we're gonna stay in a hotel, downtown Boston, across the street, and like being excited for this weekend. But we stayed in the hotel the whole time. I mean, I did not leave the hotel. It was also COVID, so it was part of the bubble. But like we had all of our meals catered in. It was a very like blinders on. You're not seeing outside people. Like this is closed off to just a team. Well, the team that we were playing, who was the lower seed, who hadn't been to the championship before, they went downtown Boston. They did a night in the North End. And we were all like, man, look at the team we're playing. Like, we wish we were doing that. But, like, come to find out, when you're older and more mature and you realize what your coach was doing, she was really protecting us and saying, this is championship level focus. Just because you're in the NCAA tournament does not mean that this is, like, a free trip. And you're going to go check out a new city. Like, that's great if you want to do that. But if you want to win, like, you are here on a business trip.
Yeah, like, hopefully you get the opportunity to explore with a trophy in your hand. But you can't do the exploring and everything beforehand. But that's such a great perspective, and that's why I wanted to ask you too, because again, you come from a championship caliber program, and sometimes you have to strategize differently, because I know so many schools in situations where it's just like, yeah, we can explore as well as practice, as well as like, that's what's going to motivate us. Or some programs, they call it team bonding. You can bond in a hotel room.
That's what it was. Team bonding downtown Boston. We were like, that's pretty nice. But we were literally doing ours in the hotel room.
In a better strategic mental building way, I would say. So, yeah, that's a great way to put that. And that's something that I truly believe, like, South Carolina probably had the number on.
Well, if you're enjoying the show, you can catch new episodes of Respect Her Game every Tuesday. You can watch on YouTube or Twitch and listen on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. It is finally time to talk about probably the last time that we're going to be giving our predictions for March Madness. This week, after that, we'll know, because Selection Sunday is in just a few days. But I'm going to give a quick rundown over 3 of the conference championships. SEC champs, as we just said, South Carolina with their defeat over Texas. ACC champs, not Notre Dame. They weren't even in the conversation. Duke beat NC State, which was so wild. NC State's best player, Isaiah James, actually went down, came back, so that had to have had a factor in it. But Duke coming out with the ACC championship. And then the Big Ten, UCLA Bruins beat USC. Their only 2 losses this season have been to USC, but wow. Could you believe that we had these championships, just now, and now we're only a few days away from March Madness? How do you like seeing the top team, how it's going to shake out? What are you thinking?
I think that Madness has never been a better way to paint all of this.
Yes.
And I mean, kudos to them establishing it as March Madness, because it is such, especially touching back to the UCLA USC conversation, because then you start getting really excited. I remember some of the comments for the last UCLA USC preview, and it was like, dang, you ladies are really pushing towards USC. And it's like, how can you not right now? Like, what they're doing is speaking for itself. And then you get into the bracketology of all of it. Love doing that. I had to stop because it wasn't good for my mental health. I was just shredding.
Too competitive.
Shredding papers. Yeah. Then when you do it with your brother and his friends, that's a definite way to lose your mind. But then, then everything switches around when it comes to setting into the brackets. And then you see those championship teams, or those teams that do make the deeper runs in this, solidify themselves after you kind of question if they had the capability of popping in. Like, we know UCLA has been great, but they had some weaknesses exposed leading up to this point. So it's going to be great to see how they compete, because if there's one thing about March Madness and bracketology, there's always an underdog that's going to get in the mix. And
that's the best part. That's
stress
the best part.
Some things out.
I love it. Well, and you've seen these coaches like Don Staley and Lindsey Gottlieb going out and really saying, like, no, this is who the number 1 seed should be. Like, to the media after their games, Lindsey Gottlieb said, I thought whoever won this game should be the number 1 seed overall. So she was saying, it's either us or it's UCLA, which I thought was a very funny way and kind way to say, like, it's probably going to be us, like, if we would have won, right? Or UCLA and the Bruins. And I just think that with the strength of, South Carolina's schedule being the number one in net competitiveness overall. I think that's really hard to combat. However, UCLA has only lost to USC.
Yeah.
Right? So I feel like that's the hard thing of when you're saying, okay, who should be number one? Who should be number two? It's definitely not Texas. That's all we know is that Texas, I'm so sorry, but you lost the number one spot. You're still an incredible team. But after that performance, just getting absolutely annihilated really by South Carolina, that South Carolina has to fall above them this time.
Yeah. Well, I think some good hope for UCLA is like you do start to see some teams that you don't face as much. So having that tough competition within your regular season schedule, there's a lot to draw on that you can like seeing a newer opponent or a fresher opponent is one of two things. You either know how to completely take them because of how you have managed a tougher schedule to begin with, or they show you different looks that you haven't been well prepared for. And that's what's going to throw some kinks and some curveballs for the bracket coming up here. But UCLA should be fine because I think that they have learned some tough lessons right on the cusp of heading into March Madness.
Definitely. And this is a team that spent 12 weeks at the top.
Right.
That's a long time to be at the top. And yes, that doesn't mean anything going into the postseason, right? Like, it's a clean slate for everyone. You could have the number 1 and number 2 seeds done after week 1. That's why it's called March Madness. But I do think that time being at the top definitely is going to help them in the seeding.
Yeah.
And them having, only had those 2 losses to USC is a factor. But just looking quickly at your mock brackets, what people are saying online, what jumps out at you from what we might see at Selection Sunday?
Oh, that's a good question. When it comes to the selections and stuff, I really don't know what to make of some of it because we've seen so much movement in the past 2 weeks.
There's been so much. It's like a shaker bottle.
Yeah.
It's like one game, right?
Like I said, for the health, for my mental health, I think I stopped leaning too heavily in one direction or another because it never ended up being what it appeared to be. So I think right now I'm just gonna ride. I'm just gonna ride the
wave. I mean, I think I'm in the same boat. It's kind of like we're gonna see where that number 1 and number 2 go, but there's been so much movement between the top 5 teams, and even LSU and TCU coming. TCU is ranked the highest they've been ever ranked in their school's program history, which is incredible. So you see some of these teams, like you said, who will the underdog be? I don't know. And I think sometimes, we can think of the underdog as that unranked team, but really just because of how competitive the college basketball, top 5 has been, the underdog team right now, it kind of feels like it's like Florida State at number 6 or potentially number 6 or Tennessee at number 5. Like, Vanderbilt could be the underdog team when really they're a top, 25 ranked program.
Right.
And we're saying, we feel like they're the underdog because of how competitive these other teams are.
Yeah, I think what makes me nervous is, think about some of the teams you just named and the Cinderella stories that go along with it. Those are coattails that kind of carry you into different scenarios. So regardless, I think we're in for an impactful, really competitive March Madness. But yeah, I can't lean in one direction or another.
Well,
this is just too much.
And this is just the women's bracket. Like, we haven't even gotten to the men's side and all the crazy things that are going on there. But this is a Respect Your Game, so we will focus in on women's college basketball. Man, we got to get our popcorn ready. We got to get maybe some Mike's pastries in honor of just Boston sports and all the things. But super excited for March Madness Selection Sunday is coming up in just a few days. So thank you so much for tuning in to Respect Your Game. Make sure to tune in to the PWHL, women's college hoops, and all the things going on around the world and here.